and Fiona.
Yeah, hi everyone. Welcome to our panel. This is our second one. I know a lot of you guys also went to the Navigating the DAS after RPI one, so thank you guys for coming to that. First of all, if you guys have any questions, feel free to put those in the chat at any time, but we will have a dedicated Q&A for 30 minutes after our 1-hour discussion. So yeah, put those in there. Also, if you guys saw the flyer, you know, we also had other panelists, Jacob and Meg. Unfortunately, they couldn't be here today, but they send the regards, and also they might send some other info about their company and some other info they have about portfolios. But we have Lucas here who gladly joined us. Thank you for returning to us, Lucas. And so with that, I'll introduce all of our panelists. So our first panelist is Caitlin Connerny, who is an associate creative director at Rivian. Then there's Lucas Lappy, who is head of product and co-founder at DorisDev and Canopy. Then we have Danica Patrick, who is a UX research manager at Splunk. And then last but not least, we have Austin Pietrobono, who is a motion and brand designer. So cool, thank you all for joining us. The first topic we want to talk about is your background. So panelists, in a few sentences, can each of you briefly talk about your background? So who you are, what you do, when you graduated, where you live, and how you got there. Anyone is free to speak first.
All right, I'll go first. So I guess a little bit about me. I grew up in Rhode Island. I went to school in Newport, and I always really loved like art and design and computer science. I wanted to be like an artist initially. And then when I got to high school, I learned a little bit more about programming, took like an intro to Java class or AP computer science or something like that. And from there, I discovered the RPI program for the dual with GIS, which I thought was perfect. It was well balanced between technical work and then also design and product design and innovation and everything like that. So I decided to do that program. I came up to Albany area and did that for 4 years. So I did my Bachelor of Science in Computer Science and Product Design. From there, I went to Apple. So I had a couple internships. My first was with a startup called Flat World. I did a little bit of freelance work as like a UX web designer. Wasn't really sure exactly at the time. And went to Tesla after that, product design, and now I'm at Rivian as a associate creative director.
We'll pass it on to you, Austin.
Yeah. Hey everyone. So yeah, I'm originally from Phoenix, but I originally went to RPI for mechanical engineering. But I quickly realized I was terrible at the coursework. And then there was this design program where everyone was getting these awesome jobs, both in school and post-grad. So I was really interested in kind of PDI quickly after I started at RPI. I transferred in, I think, second semester of freshman year. Yeah, and then was really lucky to have some like really great work experiences during school. So I worked at Hasbro, actually in Lucas's position in ATI, like after he had been in the role. So got like a really good kind of intro to like marketing and R&D and design there, and then went on to join the team at Formlabs, which is a 3D printer startup that also has some PDI alumni working there in Boston. Yeah, and then post-grad, I knew I wanted to do something design related, but was quite like unsure of where I wanted to go. I got a job with IBM as sort of like a product designer within the marketing group in New York. Yeah, and so I worked on a product design team, sort of nested within marketing in New York for like a year, and realized that I was more interested in like brand side stuff, and was able to transfer onto IBM's like global like brand content team. And I think that's where I kind of laid a big foundation for a lot of the work I still do today. It's where I got a lot of experience with like illustration, After Effects, which is like the core of my work now, is like motion design related. And yeah, I did that for about 3 years and then was interested in a change, and knew I wanted to probably live in Asia at some point. So I was fortunate enough to get a role with a smartphone company called OnePlus, that's based out of Shenzhen. And yeah, they moved me to Shenzhen, and I was able to be based in China, close to Lucas when he was living in Hong Kong. I did that for 2 years, and now I currently live in Shanghai, I basically lead the motion graphics team at Binance, which is a cryptocurrency exchange. But yeah, so my role has really gone from like brand into like motion design specifically. But yeah, that's a little bit about how I got here.
Yeah, Lucas, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hey, I'm Lucas. I'm actually from LA. In high school, I got introduced to product design and development through an internship, actually, where I worked for free cleaning off 3D prints and like doing odd jobs around a product design and development firm in Mountain View, California. It was called D2M, or Design to Manufacture, and they had an office in Mountain View and an office in Hong Kong. They had industrial design, mechanical engineering, and program management. That's where I got my first exposure to, one, the field of product design and development, and the idea of like a lot of stuff gets made in Asia, and like that is where a lot of consumer products get made. And if you want to see the whole process, you have to get out there. So at like 16, that was kind of my North Star, to try and get a role in Asia to see kind of the end or like that final stage of product development at factories, primarily in China. After that, went to RPI, was an MEDIS major. I actually transferred, or I like changed majors a number of times, including animation, management. I think I like went through 5 different programs, always keeping DIS as the core, because it was just so much fun. It felt like it was in like the right place at the right time, and it enabled, fun project work, and you can do anything you wanted as long as you were good enough at convincing a professor that it fit the criteria of the studio. At RPI, I had a co-op at Hasbro Toys, really enjoyed it. And then also had an internship at a company called Quirky, which is a now defunct, amazing startup that blew through $200 million, put together, 4 offices around the world. But it was a crowdsourced product development company where they were developing and designing a bunch of products that were entirely owned. So the team was ended up being 300 people, and there was industrial design, mechanical engineering, electrical firmware. There was an app team. There was PR and marketing, sales, distribution. We had a photo and video team, like a 4 or 5 person photo and video team with a full studio shop team. It was like amazing, and it just like did not deserve to exist because they were blowing through $50 million a year. But it was a lot of fun. I interned there, and then spent my last year as an intern as well. So I worked there 2 days a week in New York City, and then joined there full-time after graduation. Spent 2 years there until the company imploded, finally ran out of money, and realized that, making $50 million a year in revenue doesn't mean you're a $1 billion company. After, from the kind of ashes of Quirky, there were a lot of, single SKU D2C companies that sprouted out. I ended up working for an electric toothbrush company where they asked me to come on full time, and I said I'd only join if I got a chance, if I was based in Hong Kong. So moved out to Hong Kong, to oversee the final stages of development and manufacturing of that product. Was supposed to be there for 3 months, spent 3 years there. And while I was in Hong Kong, started Doris Dev, which was all ex-Quirky people. And what we do and did was help founders design, develop, and engineer their products. We started with 4 people, and now we're just under 30, split between New York and Hong Kong. We've recently, last year, we launched our own brand, which is called Canopy, which now has its own marketing team and uses Doris Dev for design and development operations. Yeah, I'm based primarily between New York and Austin, Texas. And I think that's it.
Yeah, thank you. Danica?
Yeah, sure. I can wrap up here. So hi guys, I'm Danica. Nice to meet everybody on the call. Hope RPI is as awesome as it was when we were all there. I came in on, I think on day 2, I came in as an ME and I found the PDI program. I think it was year 3 it existed. So I graduated in 2005. So I graduated ME PD. I interned while I was at RPI at Mercedes-Benz in Germany. And then I also interned at Pratt & Whitney. And when I graduated, I spent 3 years doing mechanical engineering and instrumentation for test engines before realizing, and I don't know how everyone's feeling about me, I really didn't like sitting at a CAD station all day. That just like, at some point I was like, man, this is a lot of CAD. I loved ME because you could see your product, you know, someone would build it and you could hold it in your hands. But I wanted to get more into the design side. I wanted to get more into the innovation side. I went to grad school to kind of try and pivot myself out of ME at Stanford, going through their design program. I loved it. It was a really good opportunity just to relocate, learn about other industries, and understand what parts of design I loved. From there, I worked at AT&T in their innovation team, building new products and services from connected homes and connected healthcare products. Anything that had a cell chip could put a cell chip in it, we put it in it. From there, I worked at Google for a few years. I worked on their product excellence team, trying to help them bring design to a core aspect of their company, instead of kind of like oh, ship it, we'll fix it later, and then never getting around to it. And then I spent 4 years working at Google's self-driving car project, now Waymo, as a user researcher. So there I did end-to-end research on the Phoenix research program. So that we have a program down there that allowed users to take rides in our self-driving cars for regular transportation, like an Uber or Lyft. And then more recently, I've moved to Splunk. I'm a manager. I manage a design team and I manage a research team. We build tools for IT and software development. And yeah, so I've had a lot of experience. And just in the world of portfolios, I've probably interviewed so many candidates, my eyes go cross-eyed. So have lots of cool insights for you guys on how to try and stand out in a competitive market out there, because portfolios are just a small piece of the puzzle, but an important one.
Great, thank you all so much, and thank you for sharing your journeys. It sounds like you all had amazing journeys throughout your PDI experience and where it's all taken you. So thank you, Danica, for mentioning the portfolio, since that's why we are all gathered here today. The pressure to move into the professional world is really felt by RPI students, especially right now. And going through the DIS program, we are all focused on building our design skills. So something that can sort of get lost along the way is building that portfolio and documenting the progress that you've made. So in the same way that resumes are used to tell a story and help you stand out, you're expected to produce a portfolio to showcase and document your development as a designer. So we'd like to just start up the discussion to tailoring your portfolio to development of your experience at RPI, and ask you all what the process was like of creating your portfolio while you were here at RPI. And I'll welcome any panelists to sort of start us off. I know that your portfolio creating process may have not started directly at RPI, so feel free to welcome and take the question however you'd like.
I can go first. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go.
All right, I was like, well, I went first last time, but I figured I'd try again. So as a student, for me, I think, if I'm being honest, I probably didn't document my work as well as I should have. That's probably like an important piece of what I would recommend for everyone now. Ultimately, the design process is the same. So I know in DIS you work on different kinds of projects, probably a little different than what I did. Myself being more digital, sometimes I would have to make like physical products and I had no idea how to CAD. Like I remember I had to like beg one of my friends to like help me with CAD or do it, and I would I'd just be like, thank you, I'll help you with your like graphic design or whatever. So I didn't quite get there with some of those projects. Like it wasn't as well suited to the work I was interested in. So I didn't clarify this before, but my role is in digital design. So like UX, UI, brand experience. If you go to like Rivian.com and you do the vehicle configurator, that's the type of product that I work on, like a native app. So what I did as a student was try to find ways to bring some of my projects into the digital realm as much or as little as I could. So some of them, it wasn't necessarily possible, but even that project itself, I would find a way to make sure I could document the experience, document the process, the work that I did, especially the research, identifying the problem, understanding who those different user groups are. All of that foundational stuff is the same. So a lot of that would still apply. And to me, I think for looking at portfolios and looking at resume and looking at work, that work is still translatable. If you did like a bunch of industrial design projects and still wanted to apply for like a digital design role, that would still be relevant. So I think that's an important note. I relied a lot on side projects. So that's another thing I would probably recommend, like whether you're in a school, club, or just yourself over the weekend doing like a design challenge, just a quick sprint, especially to pad your portfolio more towards the direction that you're interested in. So again, if you are doing a lot of like physical product design, ID work in your curriculum, and that's not necessarily the direction that you want to go as like a full-time designer, you can say, hey, this weekend I'm going to do a design sprint. I'm going to execute a design challenge. I'll give myself 8 hours. Again, still the same process, and just documenting that really well, I think is important and helpful to translate into your portfolio, especially as a student. And then the last piece I think is internship work. That's not always possible, but given like you just want to connect with your company, understand like how strict NDAs are, if there are NDAs and stuff like that. So that was also another good option. I think probably the most important piece throughout all of this, like I've said a couple of times, is the documentation. So making sure that you're telling the full story, everything that you discovered, all like the most important findings. I know there's a couple questions later in terms of like, what is the portfolio and maybe what should be in there and my perspective. So I'll go into that more later, but just making sure that you're keeping track of things and things that you're finding most interesting, I think are always really exciting to both see and incorporate as a part of your process and story.
Thank you. And Austin, did you want to pick up from there?
Yeah, I guess I was gonna talk, like, I know for me, when I was building kind of my first portfolio, it's pretty daunting to like know where to start, because it's like a documentation thing, but you're also building like, it's like an experience around your kind of work history and what you've worked on. I guess my advice would be, pick the route that allows you to focus best on kind of what you're interested in. So like if you're interested in like front end development and like web design, then like you should probably put like a ton of time into like figuring out how to build your own experience, so that if a recruiter is coming to your website, they understand that you've put a lot of thought into like the actual like web design experience. Whereas like I think from a lot of the portfolios I look at when we're recruiting for like motion designers, it's really about like the storytelling through video. And so like the like actual construct of your portfolio is not as important, as opposed to like what work are you featuring, and like the way that your video work like tells a story or like kind of showcases your own work. So like for motion designers, your reel is really important, and is like almost like another portfolio that's just like solely video. So I would just suggest like think about the strategy of kind of like the way you deliver your portfolio. And then like Keaton said, just documentation is like something that always, it's like really easy to forget. So like take the time, like when you're mid-process, to document things, because when you're kind of like especially if, I've done projects that have like high visibility. I at OnePlus I did like a logo that went on the back of all the devices, and you have the final product and you're like, this is amazing, but you want to be able to show the process. And there is process, there's like sketches, like digital renders and stuff. But then when you're sitting at the end of the project, it is so much more difficult to go back and like find everything, and dig it all up, rather than, sort of archive it as you go. And I think a lot of those like kind of work in progress moments don't feel important when you're sort of kind of grinding and building towards the final product, but at the end it is like really something that helps tell the story in your portfolio afterward. So I think that's a really good piece of advice. But
Yeah, I'd say like as a mechanical engineer, so this was like building and designing a portfolio was not part of, like, building something from scratch was not part of what was being presented for me. But getting a Squarespace site and like not designing it from scratch, like if you're an ME, like if you're in Austin's place, or like Caitlin, if you want to be a UX designer, that's probably not the right way to go. But as an ME, like, don't do it from scratch. It's gonna look like shit. It's going to be a pain in the ass to update. It's going to break constantly. I would get a Squarespace site. They have student discounts, like, and update it as much as you can, as much as possible. Hide projects that look really crappy, but constantly update it. Like, hide pages, like, and publish them when they're good enough or when you think you want to share it. But I went through like a ritual. This was kind of later at Quirky, at my first job, where like every Friday, like, you stop working at like effectively 2, and like I would grab a beer and just like work on my portfolio, because like it's like, this place is coming down and like I'm gonna spend some time like documenting my work. So I would definitely think about like doing that as just part of your weekend activities, like really, really refining your portfolio, redoing your work as well is really important. It's not meant to be a historical document, like lie and cheat, like make it look way better than it looked when you presented it the first time, or those projects. So definitely do that. I think that's the best advice I can give.
Lucas, that's my favorite. I love just like, and I think the big thing is, if you put something in your portfolio and you hope nobody asks you about it, don't put it in your portfolio. Like, if you don't want someone to talk about it, like, you're like, you don't love that project, it's not your favorite story, like, leave it out, right? I remember people bringing up stuff for my RPI stuff and be like, why don't I even have this project in there? Yeah, so I remember putting together my portfolio from RPI pre-Squarespace, pre-digital cameras, really, just so you guys can put yourself into 2005 when I was trying to get a job. It was hard work. Take advantage of all of those assets, take a lot of pictures. And just when I was putting it together, I think I spent a lot of time writing and trying to tell my story, and not enough time thinking about somebody consuming it. Those original times, the truth is, people don't have a ton of time to browse through your portfolio. You have a couple of projects to make a quick impact. So pick your favorites. I love video projects to this day. Like, if someone has like a cool 2-minute video about something that they put together, that's probably where I'm going to spend some of my time. I'm going to scan through, look for process. I'm going to look for some final studies, some final readouts. But yeah, when I think back, I didn't really know what people needed from portfolios. So it's cool you guys are doing this panel. And yeah, take advantage of the tools that are out there. I don't think people are going to judge you on whether or not you built your own website. They're there to go like, is there something on here that makes this person look like they have finished polish, a good process, and they care about their customer?
Yeah, I'd say probably to add on to that, I did study computer science, but I haven't coded since I graduated. So when you get into the field, especially like digital design, There are not a lot of expectations, especially anymore, for someone to be what we call a unicorn who can do both. If you love design, it's great to have a background in CS or anything technical, but I think the best design work is going to be a lot more important than like, and I also built it, because like 90% of the jobs are going to be focused more on design specifically. So that's what I say. Like, I did build my own website in college, and I would not recommend it because it was not reflective of good design. I was not very good at development. So yeah, I'd say use the tools that are out there for sure.
Thank you guys. And just to sort of touch on it, if anyone else wants to add on about how you guys continue to develop like your portfolio as you guys progress throughout your academic career. I know sort of, Lucas, you mentioned sort of trying to block out that time on the weekends. Did anybody else have any tools or some timelines or skills to sort of develop for that? If there's nothing to add on, then don't feel pressured to.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. So I think for myself, I only start thinking about that really if I'm not loving my job and I'm like, maybe I should start getting my stuff together. So it's not something that now for me is very periodic. What I think is important, again, is just documentation as you're doing it. But now it's in a sense that's a lot more productive even for the work that I do. So when I'm doing work now, normally a normal part of the process is we put together a design brief before we even kick off work. Then what we do after that is put together the brief and the project plan. Then after that, we're in our discovery research phase. We're doing all of the like surveys, or we're doing qualitative or quantitative testing, whatever that is. That all goes into like a research readout deck that then gets summarized in terms of the opportunity and our perspective and the users and the pain points. So really we're documenting it as we go along, so on and so forth. After that, there's a UX strategy deck. Then there is a like vision deck, and then there's like high level concepts and wireframes. So we start to create all of these things as a natural part of the work that we're doing. And it's great for me to look back on for when I am thinking about transitioning, if I am. But even aside from that, these tools are already so critical for getting alignment from the people that you work with, whether you're partnered with like product managers on a day-to-day basis, or you're working with engineering and you're really trying to clarify an idea. It's a really powerful tool that is valuable on its own and happens to be really valuable later on if you need to look back at your work.
Yeah, and your portfolio has a role inside of your organization as well, right? You'll want to get a promotion. You're going to have to put together a portfolio review of the things that make you qualified. When you want to go look for a new job, I bet you're going to have to do a portfolio presentation to kick off that interview process. So constantly considering the fact that this is something that tells about how talented you are and the cool things you've accomplished should always be on your mind. My teammates, the people on my team today, I have them have a Splunk resume. So at the end of every project, they document what they've done, and the resume is for them to show off, you know, and also for a little bit of personal gratitude. Like at the end of the year, like, and you want to raise, like, I'm going like, look at all the cool things you've done. Like, I'm proud of them. You should be proud of them. So never stop looking at your work and thinking about it. You know, this first time out of college, I think what's hard about it is you don't have a company, right? You don't have, like, you might have some great internships that absolutely should be on your resume and in your portfolio. But, you know, your schoolwork's a little harder, right? Because you didn't have a customer, you don't really have user metrics, like there's a whole bunch of stuff that's missing. So it's a different type of story. But, you know, this is a skill that you should be refining if you want to advance your career forever. Like I literally, you will never stop having to sell yourself and put this stuff together.
Yeah, Danica, thank you so much for bringing that up. Like showing how talented we are through our portfolios. So on like the same note, how did you guys leverage the DIS program and any of the unique qualities you learned from the program, either in your portfolios or just in the world?
Yeah, I think for what's unique about DIS is it's project-based. As an engineer, you generally don't have project-based classes. You get like one or two, and you have this like cookie cutter template that everyone has, and it like is the thing that GE sponsored for the past 10 years that everyone from our RPI had to do. So what's unique about DS is like you have the opportunity to add work to your portfolio. So, and it's throughout your whole career. Like you want to semester effectively. So really leveraging those throughout the entire process. And I think going in, what I always did is I went into each studio saying like, hey, what do I really want to do this semester? And like, how can I use this portfolio or this studio to add a project like this to my portfolio? Like, leverage this open-ended opportunity. And like, no offense to the professors, but like, they are very liberal and oftentimes we're not paying attention on what we were doing. And so you could get away with doing almost anything you wanted as long as you were good enough at fooling the teachers into what you wanted to do. So really, really thinking about that and like leveraging the time you have. And then thinking about the tools you have, the equipment you have at RPI. There are very few places where you're going to have that much access to machine shops, to laser cutters, to equipment, to giant printers. Like those, those things are hard to come by, and they're harder to come by as you get into into your professional career. And they're very hard to come by, when you don't have a job, unless you're in like a tech space, and they're more expensive, and they don't get billed to your parents' credit card or to your future debt that you don't have to think about right now. Use the time you have to sneak into those shops and use those tools and add that work to your portfolio.
I think one really big advantage of kind of the DIS program too. I saw this kind of when I was in the recruiting process at IBM. I think lots of, I would not necessarily like corporate, but lots of like innovation driven companies or companies that want to be sort of innovation driven are looking for like how to bring in creatives and designers with sort of a different mindset. And I still think like our program has like this uniqueness to it about like problem solving and just like the types of work experiences that lots of us get in college, like during our university years, that just make us like more interesting for like when I got hired by IBM, they were looking for university grads that had some sort of interest in design, user research, that kind of thing. And I don't think a lot of traditional art students still kind of get that the components that are kind of core to the DIS program. So I would leverage that as much as possible, because I think IBM in particular has kind of blown up the like design thinking as like their own kind of corporate practice. But I think a lot of companies are still looking for, how do you create those types of organizations within, design teams, engineering teams, et cetera. So I think that's like a big selling point, and can be something that you leverage during the interview process.
I think something else that I still leverage to this day is failure. A big piece of working in industry is trying things that don't work, or getting somewhere in a project and losing funding, or falling behind, or hitting dead ends and blockers. So I am totally fine with people telling me a big part of their process in a project and then going like, oh, and this is where it fell apart. So if we go back in time, I change it, but here's, you can still love your process. You could still love your project, and have it have been a miserable disaster at the end. So I love those stories in an interview. I love seeing them in a portfolio. I love broken stuff in a portfolio, especially for physical designers. It's not all about fit and polish. It's a lot about how you learn and how you think. And I learned that at RPI because I probably failed on a project or two, just to throw it out there, probably because I did what Lucas did and tried to let them convince me to do something that was way outside of the scope of the project. So definitely leverage those experiences. And something else about college projects that are something to note. These projects, we've heard a lot of them. right? Like we know the GE project, we know the redesign an HMI project, right, for a car. We've seen them all. You don't have to convince me that the solution you guys had is perfect. Actually, I'd really prefer if you didn't. I really want to know about you. I want to know about how you design. I want to know about how you think. I remember I was hiring down in Texas, or sorry, in Arizona. Every student who came through had gone to ASU, and they had all done the same project. It was as a manager, you know, you're hiring. They're all students, like you all went through the same classes. Some of the students crushed their presentations because they sat down and said, they talked to me about like, here's what I learned. Here's some of the problems we had. I talked about their team. They talked about the process. Other people brought me their final designs and talked to me about like, here's why we chose blue. Here's why we did this. Here's why we did that. And you know, you can obviously see that I would lean towards more of that because like it's a college project. We didn't expect you to get it right. We expected you to learn. So be wary of that because it can kind of be a turnoff because that's not really what we want to hear about. We really want to hear about the design.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. Lucas, that was a really humorous point about like choose a project that goes well on your portfolio potentially, you know? I didn't say out loud, Raquel, don't be mad, but that kind of goes on to like the next question I wanted to ask was like, can you guys give an example of projects that you included or did not include or factor into your portfolio from DIS? Like Danica, I know you applied to grad school at Stanford. Did you have to make a portfolio? What was that experience like? Did you have to add DIS work to that?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I think what's really nice to see in a portfolio, especially for something concrete, is a common theme. So I would say, unfortunately, the reason I got my first job is my theme in my portfolio was I was really good at CAD. So that obviously I ended up with a job doing a ton of CAD. What I focused on in my portfolio to Stanford, though, is that I really wanted to tackle big problems that I really wanted to change the world. So some of the projects I'd worked on at RPI, like challenges with how to get cars off the road that were very pollutant because they were really old, or we did a project on oh man, this is really trying to think back what I put in that portfolio. There was probably one of my STS projects. I feel like I'd written a paper on something that I was just really passionate about, technology and youth. Again, this is like when the iPod came out. So the stories are so old when I try and tell them now. But that was a story. I was like, I'm coming here because I want to work on big problems in the world. I'm not coming here because I want to build things a little bit better next time around, which is what I was working on. So yeah, definitely tailor your story. And you know, those RPI projects, I think college allows you some freedom to work on a variety of things, but trying to tell the story that you have a common, you know, you come through, that's I think college allows for some of that. It has your personality attached to it. Unlike some of my work projects, which they're aligned with my work versus me. So
That's a really good point, especially that designer identity piece is really important. Does anybody else have anything to add about how you kind of develop your common theme or your designer identity?
I'm trying to remember like what I think I was so scared of like putting in my student projects. And so I think I was always looking for like how can I work my like work experience into it that I had during university. I think that's one of the advantages of working kind of like marketing and brand side is that you put so much stuff out into like that goes like live on either the web or, you know, on social. And so I did leverage like sort of my internship work a lot, just because too, like working, my last internship was like 3D printing. So it had this like convergence of like marketing content, but also, you know, we were doing the modeling and printing ourselves. So it was kind of a nice way to talk about both areas at once. Just, I think we were talking about it before, but also just looking for opportunities like on campus or at home to sort of like work on the type of work you want to be doing, not necessarily like what you're doing in class. So I had a work study, I think at the campus bookstore actually. And it was supposed to be sort of like cashier and like stocking the shelves, I think. But I ended up just being like the campus bookstore's graphic designer, which was awesome. That was like the first experience I had of doing like seasonal, like editorial marketing content. And it was all sorts of like print, large posters, small posters, stickers, that kind of thing. So that was actually a really great experience that gave me, a ton of, practice at like, how do you design for print? How do you do illustration, typography, that kind of thing. And it was work study. So yeah, just those kinds of projects that exist either on campus or at home can be like really useful, I think.
Yeah. I think it was similar for myself. Like I don't think I was really able to use, or I didn't feel like it was appropriate to use a lot of the projects I did in my curriculums. Again, they're really oriented towards like a physical product, which from me was usually pretty bad. But the process that I learned and the critical thinking that I learned was something I could very easily apply to, like I said, a weekend project or an internship project or something after school. I also had like a on-campus job working on some logo type graphic design. Remembering them now, I'm horrified, but it was something that I was able to do where I could take everything that I learned and apply it to something that felt a little bit more appropriate for where I wanted to go, more towards like the digital side of the spectrum. So yeah, that worked pretty well for me, and just putting a lot of energy and effort into that. And I think when we talk about expressing yourself through all these things, the way that you tackle your portfolio, like we said, the way that you tackle how to design your website or bring branding or your sense of self into that, and your resume, like the three of those can and should feel cohesive, and how you approach those in themselves as well.
Great. Thank you guys for telling us that. I know a big thing that's on the top of students' mind is not only getting the projects done, but also being able to incorporate the sense of themselves into their projects. So I think that's a big helpful factor that you guys sort of can tell us different ways that we can include that in our development. We also know that a lot of you do some recruiting work here for design students. And so we wanted to know more about, as a recruiter, what are the main components of a portfolio that you guys look at? Any helpful insight that you guys sort of have on that? And I can also ask some follow-up questions as well.
Yeah, I guess I've been kind of like deep into this recently. We just hired 3 motion designers onto my team. So we've been rapidly kind of sorting through like applications for different regions, but it's unfortunate because I think, we all put so much time into things like our CV, and then kind of building out like the portfolio as like this complete story. But like when you're in charge of like going through candidates, but you also have your day job, it is such a rapid fire process. It's like I just go to like, for motion, it's like either their Vimeo or their portfolio. Key things that I look for right away are typographic skill. So not necessarily how your site is set up, but like what types of typefaces you're pairing together. Does it look like uniform and sort of, or like, is it something compelling? Is it either like presented nicely or like with like a ton of personality? And then I usually look at like the first couple projects in terms of like visual style and like organization. Do they like build to like tell a story, or is it more like this work is like really amazing and you should take a look? But yeah, it's usually like, getting a sense for your own personal style and how you like assemble design components, and then kind of those showcase pieces that you have. So what are the kind of like things that you're most proud of that you've worked on, and how do you present them? Is it like really built out case studies, which can be really awesome, or is it just like a really engaging reel that sort of shows the whole breadth of kind of your work? Yeah, those are kind of the things I look for.
For myself, so we've been building out a team at Rivian for almost 2 years now, and I think the team's grown from just myself to around 40. And so when I'm looking at a portfolio and looking for folks to bring onto my team in particular, I think the number one thing that I'm looking for is critical thinking and like a depth to the work. So typically what I'll do is go through a portfolio, and I prefer like website, I'll browse, but what it's really important to me is like the first interview as well. If I like what I see on the portfolio, typically I'll want to do like a 45-minute call with the candidate. And what I really love there is like a presentation style deck that walks me through a specific case study, so that I can hear it from the person who did the work and just get a better understanding of like who they are as a designer and how they thought through the work. I think the main objectives for me, like I said, is really seeing that critical thinking and the personal creativity and exploration and like desire to push beyond the expected and try new things. And along with that as well, like key evidence of collaboration and good teamwork and signs of leadership or excellent craft or both, and trying to just get an insight into, of course, who this person is and where they would fit on the team. What I really like to see is pieces of every part of the process. I actually send a very specific brief to people with regards to like what I want to see as a part of that interview, because I do like to be clear and then also see how people respond to that and see how they, like take direction or how they interpret things, I guess, interpret and ask. So what I typically ask for is just clarity in terms of what their discovery looked like, UX strategy, concepting, like the flows and interaction, detailed design work, and just ask for evidence of each step. And more than anything else, which you covered a little bit, is like what worked, but also what didn't work and why, and really starting to focus on those key examples. I don't need to know like every single little thing that happened in the process, but some of those big moments and like what you learned and why you did what you did, I think are probably the most compelling and most telling in terms of who you are as a designer, what you care about, what your passion is, like why did you push this project along and why did it matter? I think those are some of the most exciting things that I look for. And I think a big piece of that as well, which we talked about, is some of the storytelling as like a piece of that too. Making sure this whole story is cohesive. And that's not to say like, you don't need to be like, and then the next day we had a meeting and then we did this and we learned that. Like taking those big moments and those like key pieces of the story and just stitching those together, I think is really important for quick understanding. And that translates to websites really well as well. So when I'm browsing on a website, understanding if I should interview a candidate or not, that's what I want to see, like the main takeaways, evidence of some of this detailed thinking, but the website doesn't need to have like, pages and pages of text, if we're being honest. Nobody's going to read that, probably only you because you wrote it. But just like key takeaways, my director always describes it as like quick and snappy, like the main point, and very quick to absorb. So those are some of like my preferences when it comes to interviewing and candidates.
Yeah, I think all of the same on my side. I think thinking about a portfolio as like a presentation is a really good way to think about it. Like it should present itself, and just like a deck, like it should not be all text or mostly text. It should be graphs with an arrow and pointing to something, like as little text as possible, because truly no one's going to read it, unfortunately. Unless you're trying to be hired as a technical writer, then really focus on that. But unless you are write as little as possible, something I look for when I'm going through portfolios is like learning, that really like excites me, is like learning something I didn't know, and that is like the plus side of like the horrible recruiting process of like learning something I didn't know and being like, that's super cool, I want to talk to this person and learn more. That's like really fun. So think about it not just as a presentation of your work, but like also teaching people about what you do and stuff
Yeah, and just a couple of small things to kind of just add on to all the great stuff you guys have here. I do read a little. I love good headers. I love a really scannable page that jumps me through your process. Like, here's my prototypes. Here's my finished stuff. Here's me doing user testing, right? Whatever that is. Yeah, like really breaking that down for me. Like, I will actually spend the time to scan through. And if you use really great H1 headers and a couple of quick bullet points, not text, not paragraphs, I have time for that. I love an image that's actually has some annotation. So like, here's my final UI interface. Here's this is why I picked this. Here's why I picked this. A fantastic user quote insider framework. I love seeing people rethinking a space and trying to come up with something creative or innovative. Some broken stuff I already mentioned, love failure, love showing places like, here was a dead end. This is why we didn't go this way. I love that. And then anytime that you can, same things, like I'm looking to see also like what you did as a team, like have some fun. Like, I want to be out there looking like you guys are having fun. I want it to look like those are the people that's a team I want to be on too. So, tell me a little bit on that emotional side of being out there in the world.
That's great. And I hope that this is very helpful feedback to you all in the audience, because I know I'm taking notes over here. I guess sort of to understand the importance of the portfolio in the design application process for any position in the field, we're sort of wondering, just from your perspective, how can a portfolio make or break a chance at an offer? Is there a way sort of for students to make up or explain their portfolios if perhaps they don't have one or it's underdeveloped? And sort of how do you guys go about that process if you've run into that issue?
That depends on where you're applying to and the role you're applying for, right? Like, I don't know if MEs always have a really strong portfolio. If you're applying for a UI UX design role and you don't have a portfolio, I think that'd be strange, just because it's pretty commonplace. And I have absolutely not gotten a job because of a portfolio. I have been told that in feedback. So it is important, especially if you're applying to companies that expect it. So expect to spend time on it if that's the type of role that you're going for.
Yeah. There were a couple internships where I couldn't share work on like my website. So I think one expected case is when you're like, here's my resume. I can't just share you a link to my work. All I have is like some weird, logos. This is my personal case. I don't do logos. Tried that, didn't work. But for me, I would just say, hey, like, I can share more if we set up a call. So that's kind of sketchy because on one hand, you're like, I promise I have some cool work if you just set up a call with me. And I think in that case, make sure that you're really prepared to have a really cohesive story. You're dangling the carrot a little bit. And I think that's okay if you're like, hey, I signed an NDA, but they said I could only do it on like Zoom. I think that's okay in some places, but you're going to have to be very explicit about why you can't share it. Give a good detailed description of what the work's going to be and make sure that you are really well prepared when it does come time. I think, like we already said, if you don't have a portfolio at all, I think that's probably not great. I don't think there'll be a lot of success there, unless it is that unique case where you're like, I do have one, I just can't share it on my website. And in that case, that's where, again, I'd recommend like Sunday, take 8 hours and do a design sprint. So you're like, here's a sample of what I can do. But all my real stuff I'll have to show you on like a Zoom call, or at least doing a couple of those if you really have nothing at all. So something is certainly better than nothing for digital design.
One thing too, like an alternative that you can suggest, it's really popular, I guess, is like a mandatory interview procedure for Chinese tech companies, but you can offer to like do a design assignment. Usually we use this when someone's portfolio is kind of like rated average, but they interview with like HR, like the first interview quite well. So sometimes if the team is unsure, we will give them like a typical like design, like theoretical, but like typical design brief, and then have them work on it for anywhere from like 3 days to like a week. And then that gives us a better sense of, what their like thinking is around like, I guess, their process and their executional ability, but also like how much knowledge they have of our brand coming in or of like the industry in the space. So it's just kind of a better kind of gut check. And it can be helpful if you don't have a lot of publicly listed work, which is quite frequent if you're under NDA.
Yeah, and for us, for every position at Doris Dev in Canopy, we require projects. Actually, we'll give someone a project. It's a really easy way to weed out people who are not that interested in a role. To like, we're gonna give you work, and if you don't want to do it, like that's fine. We don't want to talk to you anymore. That's perfect. So we do that a lot. I think one thing to think about a portfolio is not purely, your proof of work and your history of work. It is a muscle and a skill of communicating your ability. And if you don't have a portfolio and you haven't built a portfolio, you're probably really bad at communicating your work and your abilities, which is your job. It's a huge part of your job period at any company. So thinking through that, that is actually a huge part of, your time in school and after, is developing your ability to speak to your work.
That's a good point. Developing how you can tell your story, how you can show your work. What are the most common mistakes you guys see in portfolios, and what are the best staple practices?
Actually, one is, a lot of people in the design space love putting photography on their portfolios and have immensely shitty photos of their work. Of like, show me your photos are really good. Show me you're really interested in photography, like by taking great photos of your design projects. Like, it's so easy. Please just do it. Like, don't have this page of like art and sketches and photos, and then like your actual design engineering work or whatever is like not very good, or not, like your sketches are bad, your photos are bad. Like, please spend some time on that.
I think what I see a lot is like a product overview rather than a process walkthrough. So that's something that can be a little bit challenging, and is also why I ask for such a specific like interview like layout, to try to avoid that a little bit. Sometimes people will walk me through like, here's the product I made and it does XYZ, and they might give me a really brief overview of like, we did research and these were the findings, and we did a strategy, or we defined a strategy, and this is what it was. I want to understand more the critical thinking and decision making that went into that. I care about that a lot more than I actually care about the final product. It's important. I want to look at it and make sure it's like, cleaned up and there's no pixel messes or anything like that. But the process is more important than anything else, I would say, for me. So that's a common mistake that I see. I think also taking it back to the why and understanding, again, I keep saying critical thinking, but that's ultimately what it is just understanding why you did everything, what you thought about it, and why it was important, maybe to you or the user base or your professor or whatever it is. I think is going to be a key part of this. Like, what's all the foundation to this project? So making sure that you go into detail on all that thought work, and it's not just like pictures and stuff that I did without any of the like the why and how.
Biggest thing I see with video portfolios is just too much content. There's just so much that lots of designers just throw in a portfolio, or it's just like lazy. It's like a Behance profile with like anything they've ever produced just listed there. So I think curation is a big thing. So when especially if you're working in-house, a lot of your work isn't going to be something that you put on a portfolio. You'll have like maybe a project every 6 months or something that's interesting enough to like actually talk about. So curating on your actual site, I think, is important. And then I do think there is value in like when you do smaller pieces of design, but it's not necessarily something that builds to like a whole portfolio piece. And I think that's something where having like a reel or leveraging like social channels can be really helpful. And is like, presents a more compelling case. Like if you have a portfolio of like kind of your polished, refined work, but then you have like a separate like Dribble or Instagram that shows like smaller work in progress pieces, it shows that you understand like the difference between like your main deliverable and like sort of still showcasing that else like smaller pieces elsewhere. It shows like a good understanding of kind of like the digital like landscape for like social channels and how you deliver content. So I think thinking about your overall like strategy on how you present your work can be useful, because not everything has to be in your portfolio. You can look for like other ways to kind of showcase your work online.
Yeah, one of the perks you guys will have going out for jobs is you went to RPI, right? Like it's a well-established company, it's a well-established school with a fantastic reputation, right? So when I think about when I'm looking at a resume, I'm not going to look at your portfolio first. I'm going to browse your resume, right? Like you kind of already have my eye, right? You've caught my eye. You're like, oh, that's a good school. It's a hard school. Not all engineering programs are hard. RPIs is difficult. So if you're succeeding there and you're going through the programs, you have my attention. So I just need a TLDR, like show me your top 3 projects. Less is more. Don't refine, don't do 7 projects on your portfolio. Okay. Do like 3 fantastic. Let me know too. Sometimes I'll ask people on like a phone screen, hey, I'm gonna take a look through your portfolio. What are the 3 things I should look at? Right. You tell me that so that when I'm browsing through, I don't waste my time on something that's not awesome. Right. If you just tell me, Danica, like these are the 3 things, I'm happy to spend my time where you think I should, because I don't know how to go through your portfolio. There's 50 projects on here. Like I'm going to pick the one with the coolest picture, which probably isn't the one that you'd probably prefer me to go through. So, don't hesitate to, on top of like just curate, but just like delete, remove, hide, when it comes to getting out there. Right. Because like, I would probably say when you're just to get in the door, your portfolio for me, 25%, a lot of it's your resume. But again, because you guys haven't had a ton of work experience, your portfolio might weigh a little bit higher. But don't get stressed out about it either. Like you will have time to update and refine it as you go and get your first jobs. You'll have so much cool stuff to put on your portfolio. You'll have outside projects and lots of things too. So, make connections, make relationships, get your resume together, get it really done. And then, make sure your portfolio is just a chance to say, hey, I'm interesting. I'm worth your time, because what you're trying to get is that first 45 minutes. And after you get 45 minutes, then your portfolio doesn't actually matter anymore, right? Like once you're in the interview process, it's your presentation, it's your interview skills, it's your storytelling, and your portfolio role kind of ends, or like at least your online digital version, because you're going to have to create another version for your presentation.
That's great. Thank you, everyone, for your guys' advice. And I just want to open the floor up for any last pieces of advice for students who are starting to create portfolios, since I know we do have a lot of younger students and newer students to the program, just how to go about that in general. And also, if you guys have anything that you would like to see come out of the RPI students, or if you think there's like a good opportunity for different scopes of projects to start working on, I'll open up that space to talk about. And also to the audience, feel free to start putting your questions in the chat or queuing yourselves to raise your hand, and we'll begin the Q&A soon.
Sorry, was that a question? If there are like, what's the question?
Yes,
sorry.
So I just want to give you guys some time just to sort of give people your last pieces of advice while we're here and while they're sort of thinking on their questions.
Cool. I think some things, so I wrote notes yesterday, so I could go through some of the notes. There's just a couple things. So I think one thing that I'd recommend is your portfolio, and I think I mentioned this before, your portfolio, your resume, and your website. Pay attention to how you design those as well. I always notice if someone's resume is especially readable or especially well designed. I think a lot of people that I've seen, I guess a common mistake there is like making it kind of crazy, like I put a header and there's a picture of me and there's all these little effects, and that's not necessary. I think, remember, we're skimming it. So it's the same as you would tackle any design problem. Who's the user? Someone who probably is just going to glance at this for like 30 seconds, read through it. Don't go nuts with like typography and color and design. They're important elements, just use them sparingly and critically, I would recommend. Make sure when you're summarizing your role that it's not too long, that it's easy to understand what you were doing. Be mindful of like using big words to try to make it seem like you did more than you did, or like we can tell if you're like, I directed this work, and we're like, you're an intern. And that's totally fine. Just be mindful of that, like how the language that you're using, so it's readable and honest. And then I think when we talk about your creative pursuits in general, those are certainly worth being showcased. I love to see, and there's a balance, like you don't need to share everything if you're not comfortable with it. But if you love doing pottery in your free time, or you love cooking, or whatever your passion may be, I think that's always something that's worth including, whether it's on your website or you just make a footnote of it in your portfolio or on your resume. I think those creative pursuits are really telling about who a person is, and it shows how this design process, always the same, bleeds into other parts of your life. Now, that's not to say like, if you don't have a creative passion, you better go get one. But it's more like, if you do, we love to see that type of thing. So please feel free to share it if you'd like. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it in terms of any last like tips from me.
That's one other thing just on like the resume stuff is like sometimes like I give my mom my resume. I still think my mom doesn't exactly know what I do for a living. Like it's a little bit like confusing. But if she can't understand what I wrote in my resume, the person that I'm going to apply to at some job who doesn't have any idea what Splunk is, if you guys have know what Splunk is, congratulations, right? If my mom gets it, then I wrote it in plain enough language that somebody who's like, what do they do? Oh, they do SaaS software for IT. Cool, I got it. And then they can see all my accomplishments. So anyway, like give your resume to someone who's not your teammates here. You know, they don't go to RPI with you, and say like, if you read this, would you know what I did? And that is a fantastic consideration, because I see so much jargon. I see so many people using things I've never, acronyms. I'm like, I don't have any idea what that means. And that's a turnoff. You know, I don't care how cool your resume is, but if I go like you're trying to outsmart me and I'm trying to hire you, it's just like, unfortunately, you just don't shine that way.
One piece, it's not really related to portfolios specifically, but I think about like where I guess the strategy I took early in my career, and I got quite lucky, I think. I think that, you know, we give so much time and consideration to our portfolio, and sort of the way we guide our career path can be quite like rigid. And I would just suggest being open to sort of like educated and calculated risk taking, because, you know, being young, being out in the, you know, early stages of your career, there's like so much possibility and learning that you can do. So just be open to, you know, just not necessarily like every role doesn't have to have like sort of like a defined, I guess, like execution play. Like, I don't know, like when I went to IBM, it was, the role was very, very broad and very, very like undefined, but it allowed a lot of maneuverability within like the marketing organization. And it's what allowed me to work on some very high level projects early in my career that have really helped define my like design sensibility, and sort of the approach I take to my work early on in my career. And I still leverage a lot of the exposure I got to kind of talented high level creative directors and designers at IBM in my work experience now. And that's a role that, you know, wouldn't have been open to me if I had gone looking for it in like a formal way. It was just because like IBM had this like marketing innovation group, and then it was sort of adjacent to the people that were doing the really awesome brand design work at IBM. So just be open to like kind of experiences that, you know, aren't in like a formal like career track, I would say.
Yeah, I on you know, a few things on top of that as well, as I think thinking about knowing what you want to do, like at every stage in your career, starting in school, it's going to be wrong and you're going to change your mind and you're going to change majors and you're going to move around. But like having a North Star of like, this is what I want to do tomorrow. And tomorrow it's going to change to be something else, but it'll allow you to really attack what you're doing in school with like, I want to learn this because I want to do this in the future. And then you learn it and you go, actually, I don't want to do this. I want to do something else. And I think that's really, really helpful for school, especially in DIS, where it's much more open and you get out of it what you put in. And I think it's really important. And I think that's the truth with most educational opportunities, but especially with DIS because it's so project based. So really think through that as you're going through your career, because it's not going to come to you. Like you have to search for your future, for the job you want and the career path you want effectively.
Yeah, thank you all so much for answering our questions. This opens up our Q&A portion of the panel. Everyone, all audience members, feel free to post your questions in the chat or raise your hand and I'll call on you to unmute yourself. The first question we have in the chat is from Alana, and they ask, for UX designers curating the portfolio, how many full feature projects do you think is a good number?
That's a great question. Oh, sorry. Do we want to do hands or should I just go for it?
Oh no, go ahead.
Okay.
Hey, Janica's saying 3.
Yeah, 3. Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It's 2 to 3. I think what I always look for is depth. So like in my brief that I send everyone, I'm like 2 to 3 projects, one that's really in depth, and then maybe the other can be more casual. So something that's like gives all that evidence that I talked about before, and then the other one is like, here's how I did that for another project, but you know, simplified.
Great. The next question I see in the chat is from Alex, and they ask, what would you do differently if you had the chance to relive your DIS days at RPI?
I would have documented more.
I would have used the manufacturing facilities more.
Yeah.
When I got to Stanford, they had a lot of the same stuff. And I was like, why didn't I do this in undergrad? I was too busy doing something else. I'm not sure what. But yeah, I think the ME program was a lot more books and stuff versus hopefully DIS has moved towards a hands-on, you know, empowering yourself to build prototypes. That would have been something I would have really enjoyed.
Yeah, I don't know. I like when I'm working now, there's so many times where I'm like, I just need to like, I want to like learn these other skills, but or like practice something that's like sort of adjacent, but not kind of my core workflow. And so when I think back how much time I had to do that type of learning in the DIS program, I'm so jealous of my past self. So I guess focusing more on like just tool development and like skill building, things like product photography and, you know, different parts of graphic design, like typesetting and, you know, advanced animation, that kind of thing. Definitely things that I should have probably, or I wish now that I would have spent more time in school kind of tinkering with and getting just practice with.
Yeah, I would take advantage more of my .edu account. Like there's so much free stuff that you can get from everywhere. It's astonishing how much stuff you can get as a student. And I really think about that from like from, you know, Adobe, like effectively everything's free as a student, to technical reporting docs for like standards of testing and for shipping standards and all that, like such crazy things are free for students. So really think about that. I would also spend much more time on my portfolio and less time on my final reports for all of my, a lot of work, knowing that like my grade may suffer, but my portfolio will be better.
One other small thing that, as I thought about some of the sharing, is my PDI professors. I'm still good friends with a lot of the students from my program. One of them, I just went to his wedding 2 weeks ago. Each of us were really close with one professor. They might not have been the same professor for everybody, but I think once I graduated, I realized, one, they're all super duper cool, right? They're like the coolest people doing the coolest stuff. And I'm really lucky that I got to know one of them really well, because he's the reason he wrote my recommendation letter for Stanford. But I probably wish I'd gotten to know a lot of my professors better, right? They feel like they're like these like people who are so much different and so much older and so much more mature than us, but actually they're just really interesting people with cool backgrounds. And if I look back, I wish I'd asked them more questions or just had a coffee with them, because I feel like I would have learned a lot and I would have made some good relationships.
I'd add on to that, to like other professors in other departments as well. Like all professors have office hours where they're just sitting in there and you can ask them anything. And if you want to do that as someone in industry, a professor is going to be like, great, I want $50,000 to talk to you and write a report on this. Like as a student, you have the opportunity to go and like ask a professor to help you solve a really hard problem. And they're like, game, because it's part of their job, it's part of what they're getting paid for, and they're not going to pay for a grant for them effectively.
Yeah,
for myself, sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah, just to add on to the documentation thing, which I still stand by. I would have probably taken advantage of a lot of the other classes and curriculums that were offered, like human computer interaction or graphic design. That's not something I was able to, or I didn't think to go do that and just try other courses. So I wish I had done that a little bit and gotten more exposure. I also wish that I probably pushed a little bit harder when it comes to the projects in the curriculum, the DIS curriculum itself, seeing if I could spin it in more of a digital way, knowing already that's what I wanted to do. I think I didn't even think to ask until I was like a senior if I could, like, would it be cool if I did like a digital solve to this? So I think there's also more opportunity there for me too.
That's great. And yeah, I think a lot of the things you guys are mentioning is stuff that you don't figure out until like your senior year, until it's too late, and you're like, oh, I wish I spent more time on that. And I know Nampoina and I are just juniors right now, but I'm already starting to feel like I already wasted a couple of years. But I do want to give some more time for a couple other questions that have been coming in. Another one from Alana was, any suggestions on how to find companies who have a good cause behind them or treats their employees well? I think in the job hunt, it can sort of get distracting looking for those big names. So understanding like truly at a core what company you're going to be working for is some great advice that we'd all love to hear.
I'd say Glassdoor. I don't know, for like discovery of companies, I think, you know, I don't have a great resource for that. But for understanding what, once you get it, a company that you found and you want to understand what their employees are like and what the workload is like, is Glassdoor. And then like reaching out to friends or friends of friends at these companies to understand, and especially friends or friends of friends that are not in the hiring vertical will oftentimes be very happy to speak about it as well, because you're not necessarily hitting them up for a job. You're saying like, oh, I'd love to tell you about, you know, they're part of the recruiting process for you. They are helping the HR team by telling you it's a great place to work, or being honest by saying don't come and work here if it's miserable.
I think you can tell a lot from a company by their interview process and who you speak with. I'd say there's also a difference, like there's so many different companies that are so many different sizes. And I think what really matters, at least in my experience, is the relationship between the direct team that you're on. Obviously, there's going to be big issues like on a grander scale, like what are the benefits and How do they escalate issues if there's ever an issue, and politics of the company? I think those are all things that are harder to identify, and those are things that people would be like, no, it's great, don't worry about it. So it's going to be hard to get that honesty. But in your interview process, that's where I think you can probe for those types of things. So gauging how honest people are being with you, if they're asking a lot of questions about you, making sure they're giving you opportunity to ask them questions, I think is a big one, and seeing how honest or transparent they're being. Like if you're asking a question like, what are the greatest challenges that you experience day to day or in the last quarter or the last couple of months? If they're like, oh yeah, no, like nothing really, it's not really a big deal, like, maybe be a little bit more skeptical of that, because you want to go into a place that is comfortable sharing their issues and is comfortable being transparent and probably has transparency as like a core value. So I think keeping an eye out for that, getting a sense of the people during your interview process and how they respond to questions, your manager, especially any of your direct teammates and partners. I think that's going to be like a really important tell of that company as a whole.
Oh, go ahead, Austin.
Sorry. Yeah, just I guess company discovery, I'm not sure. I guess you just sort of one strategy I use a lot. It's what sort of led to my role at OnePlus. Was I always keep this running list of brands that are doing interesting things in different spaces. And then, whenever I am in the job search, I have like a list of like brands sorted by like their, where they're located, that I can go through and just quickly look, like, are they hiring? What kind of work are they doing? Is there like a opportunity there to go join some team? So definitely like documenting and cataloging like the companies and brands that you think are inspiring or that would be fun to be a part of, is really I think helpful when you are in it's something that you kind of passively build, but then when you're in the active job search, it's super helpful as a starting point.
And on top of just brands, you can also do people move companies. So if you find someone you like someplace, they might go somewhere else. And then when you're looking for a job, you might tag along and go there. I think what's important to know about getting a job is that no company is perfect. You could work on the most inspiring thing in the world that has the worst company culture you've ever been at. You could have the best manager and the worst CEO. You can have a company with fantastic benefits, but you can't take a day off because you're afraid you're going to get fired. So everything is a spectrum, and I promise you cannot have it all. If we had it, we'd all work there, and no one would ever leave, and that's just not the reality. So when you're going to look for a job, I think what's really important is to identify your 3 most important things, and that might change from job to job. I worked at the self-driving car project. It was a very inspirational, very enthusiastic project. I really loved what I worked on. I was absolutely burnt out when I left. It was too much. The company was moving too fast. I didn't like a lot of things about the culture. When my next company that I went to, I had a different set of needs than when I was looking for that job. So just be clear, when you leave RPI, I'm gonna tell you the number one thing you want to find is a manager who can teach you stuff. Because you're new, that should be the biggest thing. If you walk into an interview and the person who's you're gonna work for you don't love, it's probably not a great fit. So just like pick those 3 things and like make those your non-negotiables, and go out and find those. And then when you're gonna look for a new job, make sure you have your non-negotiables. Whether it's I want to be inspired by the CEO, I want a company with great benefits because I'm thinking about having a family. I want to work on something that I'm inspired to get up by every day because my last job was really draining. Whatever those are fantastic. But yeah, don't expect a unicorn. And if you find it, please email me because I want to work there too.
Yeah, thank you all so much for joining us today. You all had really great piece of advice, and just, yeah, thank you for joining. If any of you panelists have any job openings, there are a lot of students in the audience who are looking for full-time positions, co-ops, and internships. So pass that our way and we'll pass it to the whole community. So I'll pass it to Raquel.
Hi, everybody, me again. I am so grateful to Austin, Danica, Lucas, and Caitlin for being here with us today. It's really so invaluable to hear all of this advice to all of our students. Some of it just hammering points that we cover in class, and some of it expanding so far beyond it. And it really is, I think, a testimony to like the strength of the alumni network, that we're able to still get all of you to come back and speak to our students and give them all of this incredible advice. We really, I thank you from the bottom of my heart. I know that this is what makes a difference for our students, and I hope to continue leveraging our network in this way in the future. I see a few alumni were here. If you're still here right now, know that I will come knocking eventually, and I will ask you to sit down and do this as well. And I hope it was an enjoyable experience for you all as well, to kind of go back to 2005 and think about the projects that were going on then. And I would love to one day maybe sit down and speak to you all about the projects that have been going on now in the classroom and how DIS has shifted in its 22-year history. So whenever you want to take me up on that, I would love to have you for coffee. So with that, out of respect for everybody's time, it's 6:31 and it's pretty dark over here at RPI. So I'm gonna say thank you once again to our wonderful panelists, to Nampoina and Fiona, who are once again consummate professionals at facilitating these conversations. Huge thank you to Izzy, Selena, and Raha, and Marta, who helped out with organizing this event. If any alumni would like to help future events as well, please just reach out to me. I'll put my email in the chat in case you don't have it. And all I have to say, I guess, is thank you so much for your time, and I hope to see you all in a future event. I'll let other people stream out and keep this open so that it's not a sudden closure, but if people want to leave, please feel free to do so, and I'll remain a little bit longer.
Good luck, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you everyone so much. It was great talking to you today.
Thanks, guys. Take care.
Thank you so much.
Fun times, Austin. I'm going to give you a call if you're still up.
I'm still up, dude. Our work day is
Are you
just
going back to
starting,
bed?
so. No, I got calls. I got calls with the San Francisco team this morning, so it's a good time. Good day to be up early. So.
Sorry, I'm trying to remove everybody's pin so that we can all actually talk together.
Do you want to stop recording as well?
Yes, I do.